She had suffered through a traumatic childhood.
The mother went to Liberia and never came back.
And her father was equally indifferent.
He actually denied me and said that I wasn't his daughter.
She really got no love in her life.
Eventually, she managed to escape her troubled past.
I thought, okay, maybe I can be normal.
But the scars remained.
She needed help. She needed real help.
I was so angry all the time.
And in July of 2007, her anger boiled over into an unspeakable crime.
The case was just so immediately shocking.
Almost as shocking as the horrible secret that explained it all.
That his penis had been removed. That's not something you really expect to hear.
July 28, 2007. It was a little after 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon when the call came into New York City's busy 911 center.
Somebody's bleeding to death at 436 East 59th Street. Please send an ambulance over. Queens.
The 911 dispatcher sent officers to the apartment and then got back to the mysterious woman on the phone.
Okay, could you come and open the door for the police?
It's open.
You see them out there?
No, I'm not there.
But someone called for the police at 436.
I did.
Well, that's where the police are now.
Someone's there.
Okay, who's
The person
there?
is there.
Who's there?
His name is Eric.
And who is Eric? Your father? Who is Eric?
Yeah.
Then the caller had a question of her own.
Is he alive?
Is who alive?
Eric.
I don't know. What happened to Eric?
All right, I'll forget it.
What happened to Eric?
The line went dead. Within minutes, police arrived at the apartment door.
The door is standing wide open. There's no one around. They go up the stairs to this apartment, and they find this man bound and gagged on the floor.
He was dead. The cops at the scene requested backup.
We got a homicide over here.
Okay, so what was it, a confirmed stabbing or?
No, I don't see a stabbing at this point. I see a man who's bound and gagged. He's handcuffed and gagged.
Okay.
But where was their witness, the dead man's daughter? The dispatcher got the mystery woman back on the line.
When someone calls 911, there is a record of where the telephone number is emanating from.
Where are you right now?
I'm a block away.
What's your name?
Brigitte.
Bridget what?
Harris.
Bridget Harris? Are you going to the station right now?
Yes.
All right, so they're waiting for you.
But Brigitte never made it to the police station. And searching the body at the crime scene, police would soon make another disturbing discovery. The dead man's daughter wasn't all that had disappeared. A 26-year-old security guard at New York's JFK airport, Brigitte Harris lived near the boardwalk in the Queens community of Far Rockaway.
She lived near the beach, actually, which was a big perk for her. She was really excited when she first moved out there and posted stuff all over her MySpace page about how excited she was to be able to take walks on the beach.
When she wasn't at the beach or working at the airport, Brigitte spent her free time exploring the city's darker side.
Brigitte was very much into the goth look.
She had her dreadlocks, so she had long purple hair, so she looked quite different.
Just how different depended on perspective. For a 20-something in the city, Brigitte's hair and piercings were pretty typical.
The goth look was pretty mainstream and standard for her generation and people her age.
In fact, the city's goth scene was where Brigitte made most of her friends.
Most of my other friends I met at concerts, I always drag them to the movies and get a lot of DVDs from Netflix, and I used to host parties all the time.
There was one thing that set Brigitte apart from her friends, however. Brigitte's angst wasn't an act.
Where other people were using it to express themselves and be individuals away from their parents, she was doing it from a place of rage.
Here was this person with a very big heart, but with some sort of dark past.
There's been some damage in her life. There's something in her that's very sad.
What her secret was, Brigitte wouldn't say. But it wasn't too hard for her friends to guess.
Every time her family got brought up, she sort of closed in on herself a little bit.
Brigitte Harris was born on Staten Island in 1981. Her parents were both originally from the African nation of Liberia.
There is a big Liberian community in Staten Island. It's a large refugee community.
It's a thriving community but, sort of one that's always been sort of back and forth between Liberia and the States.
Brigitte's mother had come to America in the 70s. Her father, businessman Eric Goodridge, arrived a few years earlier.
He was an achiever. He was the kind of guy that is a boon to his community and had his hands in a lot of different businesses.
He had a limo and taxi company, a record store, and an import-export shipping company.
Brigitte's mother already had 2 sons when she met Eric. The couple had 2 children together, Brigitte and her older sister Carlene, but they never married.
He wasn't around when I was born. He actually denied me and said that I wasn't his daughter.
When Brigitte was 2, her mother also abandoned her.
The mother went to Liberia for a family funeral and never came back.
She left on a laissez-passer, which is a cheaper form of a passport. And when her grandfather died, she didn't have the money to come back.
Brigitte, Carlene, and their half-brothers ended up in foster care for a couple of months.
According to the court papers, I was in a neighbor's house and my brothers and sister were in her apartment, left alone, so they took custody of us.
Then, despite attempting to disown her for the first 2 years of her life, Brigitte's father came to her rescue.
He then steps in to do what he's supposed to be doing, is being a parent to this child that he fathered.
Eric came in, took Carlene, and then came back for my brothers and I.
Brigitte was reunited with her father, but they didn't have the warmest relationship.
I don't remember him ever being kind unless he was drunk. Like he would turn on his music and dance with us and stuff.
Brigitte's father may have taken the children from foster care, but he seemed largely indifferent to the family. When Brigitte was 8, he left the children behind and returned to Liberia for an extended stay.
He ended up in a position working as some sort of official for the Transportation Authority in Liberia.
Instead of foster care, Eric Goodridge sent Carlene to stay with relatives on Staten Island. Brigitte and her brothers were shipped off to Rhode Island to live with their paternal grandmother. Not that Eric's mother welcomed them.
We were made to do all the chores while our cousins lounged around. It seemed like we were the slaves and probably working off our debt for her taking care of us.
It was a harsh life, and it seemed to young Brigitte that her grandmother's punishment was even harsher when she or her brothers disobeyed.
One time she got so upset that she threw the phone and chipped my front tooth. When I went to the hospital, she told me to tell them that I fell off my bike.
She broke a plate one day when she was cleaning the family plates, and she was beaten with a stick.
In addition to the physical abuse, Brigitte also suffered sexual abuse at the hands of a cousin.
This was actually about the 4th grade. My cousin, he would come over after church and force me to perform oral on him.
There were obvious horrors that Brigitte experienced.
Then in 1994, when Brigitte was 12, Brigitte's grandmother sent her and her brothers to Liberia to live with their mother. Brigitte was thrilled by the prospect.
I was actually happy at first because no matter what they had said about her, my grandmother and aunt was always saying bad things about her, how she abandoned us. I always imagined her to be this perfect woman who had gotten into something and she had to leave us for whatever reason.
Brigitte lived with her mother for a few months until her mother abandoned her again.
I caught malaria and she didn't come see me for the 2 weeks I was in the hospital. She said there was a revival going on at the church.
Once again, it was her father who came for her.
He heard I was in the hospital and he came to get me.
And once again, her father sent Brigitte to live with relatives. For the next 6 years, she was shuttled back and forth between Liberia and the U.S. With no settled home or consistent guardian, Brigitte became more and more withdrawn.
This was a really complicated, sprawling family. So big and so chaotic that I think she sort of got lost in there somewhere.
I didn't understand why I was so angry all the time and I wanted to be antisocial.
Brigitte struck out on her own as soon as she turned 18.
She floated around a little bit and ended up for a while in a women's shelter, saving money to buy her own, to move into her own apartment.
I decided I wanted to be on my own. I didn't want anyone taking advantage.
When she settled into her Far Rockaway apartment in 2006, it looked as if Brigitte's chaotic childhood was behind her.
I thought, okay, maybe I can be normal and everything is going to be fine.
She was a kid who was fighting the demons inside her, but was a functioning member of society.
She started her own sort of circle of close friends that really became, I think, her family.
In the process, Brigitte was able to leave behind the father who had left her behind so often in the past. And as far as Brigitte's friends knew, Her father barely even existed.
She never spoke about him.
He tried to call me when I got my first apartment, and I asked him how did he get my number, and I just told him to lose it and don't call me anymore.
But could she exclude him completely?
To actually sever that relationship entirely is very difficult.
In June of 2007, Eric Goodridge was suddenly back in his daughter's life and back in the States.
He was back for some sort of medical treatment because he was suffering from a failing liver.
He was staying with Bridget's older sister on Staten Island. And when Brigitte found out, Carlene tried to convince Brigitte to forgive their father.
She said he was there to make amends and I should just try to talk to him.
Brigitte reluctantly made the trip from Rockaway to see her father. But after an 8-year absence, the conversation was awkward.
I couldn't even tell him hi, let alone try to talk to him. So he approached me in her dining room and said we needed to talk.
Brigitte agreed to get together with her father a few days later.
She thought maybe we can talk about this and we can try to have some sort of relationship, or I can at least get this off my chest and move on.
But then, as the family gathered in Carlene's apartment for an impromptu reunion, Brigitte learned that her father would soon be going back to Liberia, and he wouldn't be going alone. 2 of Brigitte's young nieces would be going with him.
He had plans to take those 2 girls back to Liberia.
And as soon as she heard her father's plan, Brigitte hatched one of her own.
When he told me that he was going to take my nieces back to Africa with him, I knew I couldn't let that happen. I knew I had to try to stop him.
Coming up, Brigitte follows through with her plan.
I called Carlene and told her what I had done.
But just what had she done?
It had been cut off with very sharp blade.
A little after 1 o'clock on the afternoon of July 28, 2007, New York City police pulled up outside Brigitte Harris's Queens apartment. Moments earlier, she had called 911 and reported that her father needed medical attention.
Somebody's bleeding to death at 436 East 59th Street. Please send
What borough, ma'am?
Queens.
I do remember calling the police and telling them that somebody was bleeding to death.
By the time the police arrived, the 26-year-old was gone.
The police and the paramedics get to this house. The door is standing wide open. There's no one around. They go up the stairs to this apartment, and they find this man bound and gagged on the floor.
It was Brigitte's father, Eric Goodridge.
She confirmed that it was her father. When the operator asked her what happened, she said, "Forget it."
Whatever had happened to Eric Goodridge, he was dead. Although despite Brigitte's comment about him bleeding to death, it was immediately clear to the police at the scene how her father died.
She asked me, was Eric still alive? And I said, what do you mean? You know, what's
Okay, so
going
she
on?
knows who this person is.
Yeah,
Okay.
so what was it, a confirmed stabbing or?
No, I don't see a stabbing at this point. I see a man who's bound and gagged. He's handcuffed and gagged.
Brigitte could help solve the mystery. But where was she? While on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, she claimed to be headed to the police station.
She said she was heading back towards the hospital?
No, she said
towards the precinct.
She said she was 1 block away. She was walking towards the precinct.
Oh, she was walking?
Brigitte never made it to the precinct house. When she was about a block away, she used to call to her sister Carlene, who lived on Staten Island.
When I called Carlene and told her what I had done, I was shocked that she said, "Don't go in the station because if you do, I'll never see you again."
Her sister saying, no, stay there. Let me come to you. Let me, help you.
Brigitte got to the police station a few minutes later. She kept right on walking.
She didn't walk into the precinct, even though she's standing on the corner of the precinct, and walks up to the beach on the boardwalk.
For the next hour, Brigitte waited while her sister made the trip from Staten Island.
When her sister gets there, she's very distraught. She's sort of vacillating between being in this very numb, not connected place to crying and talking about killing herself.
And Brigitte had the means to do it. Searching her sister's bag, Carlene found a pair of surgical scalpels.
She saw that I was going to hurt myself, kill myself.
Her sister, rightfully so, becomes very concerned and decides that she needs psychiatric help.
Carlene called an ambulance for her sister, and when the EMTs arrived, they quickly confirmed her opinion.
It was their determination that Brigitte needs observation. She may hurt herself. They don't know the full story at this point. They're just finding a woman that is terribly shaken by the events of that day.
Unaware that Brigitte may have been involved in a murder, the EMTs transported her to a nearby hospital. And while she was being admitted to the psychiatric ward for observation, the detectives at her apartment uncovered the disturbing extent of the day's terrible events. Brigitte hadn't used a scalpel on herself. She had used it on her father.
The short story of it is that she severed her father's penis.
His penis had been cut off, and it was missing.
Why would Brigitte do such a thing? Since she was in the psych ward, the police were unable to ask her directly.
Police don't have access to you in the ward without some sort of warrant, arrest warrant.
So while Brigitte was sequestered in the psych ward, police worked feverishly to piece together enough evidence to make an arrest.
She was there, under police watch, but no charges were brought against her.
The fact that she called the paramedics and the fact that she called them back while they were with the body just to check, it was pretty clear that she had killed him.
In the apartment, police found a video Brigitte had made a few days before her father's death.
I had actually made a video confession. It was sort of a confession/suicide letter.
She never explicitly says on that video what she was going to do, but she basically asked everyone, just get all the facts. Listen to the whole story before you judge me.
It was very much a suicidal, hopeless, I have to take care of this problem video.
A search of Brigitte's computer was equally revealing, particularly her MySpace page.
Brigitte had a MySpace page where her name was Dark Angel. I think she had another, either MySpace or some sort of page where her name was Lady Vengeance. And these were just references to the sort of music and type of TV shows she liked.
She called herself Lady Vengeance, and she listed a lot of these song lyrics. It listed all these stuff about pain and the inner pain and revenge.
And browsing through her computer's history files, police uncovered more crucial evidence.
The evidence was found with the search warrant in the computer. You would normally, just as a procedure, get a search warrant for the computer, see if there's any evidence in the computer.
She had done research about Lorena Bobbitt and individuals who had their penis severed.
About a month before Brigitte killed her father, she bought a scalpel off eBay.
Was it the murder weapon? A final determination would depend on the autopsy. But barely 24 hours into the investigation, the police figured they already had a solid case against Brigitte.
It was her apartment. They found evidence on her computer. She called up not once but twice. There was as far as the homicide investigation, this was a slam dunk.
The police were convinced Eric Goodrich's death was the culmination of a carefully planned revenge plot. But one question remained. What was his daughter seeking vengeance for?
What everyone was trying to understand is how could this girl do something like this?
Was her father's gruesome death payback for the childhood sexual abuse she had suffered during one of his frequent absences?
This is a woman who's been severely traumatized since she's 3 years old and knew nothing else.
Obviously, the person that failed Brigitte the most was her father. He was her father. He was supposed to protect her.
Only Brigitte knew her true motive, and she wasn't talking, at least not to the police.
If you were looking to avoid being arrested right after this incident, you do insulate yourself from apprehension or the police arresting you by entering a psychiatric ward. It affords her a lot of time to come up with a defense, a lot of time to speak with family members, to speak to her attorney and formulate a plan.
Although for the first few days she was in the hospital, Brigitte was in no condition to formulate much of anything.
They had already started me on the antidepressants. I was ready to just die and get everything over with, and I didn't have any hope.
She certainly appeared hopeless on the afternoon of July 30th, when defense attorney Arthur Idala walked into the psych ward to see Brigitte for the first time.
Arthur came to see me, and he just wanted to know what had happened in my past. And he seemed sincere. He seemed like he really wanted to help.
I'll never forget walking into the hospital. It was obvious she was trying to crawl inside of herself. It was a girl who was so troubled. Your heart just went out to her. I mean, it was obvious. She needed help. She needed real help.
There's been some damage in her life. There's something in her that's very sad.
Coming up, Brigitte finally reveals her haunting secret.
For the first time, I'd actually started opening up about it.
But is her secret too shocking to believe?
The first reaction is to think this possibly can't happen to just one person.
July 30th, 2007. Liberian businessman Eric Goodridge had been dead for little more than 48 hours. But New York police already had a prime suspect in the homicide, his daughter, Brigitte Harris.
They had the video of Brigitte admitting what she was about to do. They had all the physical evidence. It all took place in her house. They have the 911 tape. They had a case that they thought they couldn't lose.
The NYPD hadn't made an arrest, however.
She was in a psychiatric facility, and she was being detained there because she was a danger to herself and others.
But while the police had a suspect and more than enough evidence to make an arrest, they were lacking a motive. What had caused Brigitte to not just bind, gag, and then kill her father, but also to horribly mutilate him?
The way that she killed him was just so immediately shocking and upsetting.
On the afternoon of July 30th, Brigitte had two visitors in the psych ward, her sister Carlene and defense attorney Arthur Idala.
Carlene said to just talk to him, trust him. So for the first time, I'd actually started opening up about it.
Sitting in the psych ward with her sister at her side, Brigitte told the attorney the secret she had kept hidden for so long, the reason she hated her father so much.
He had sexually abused her since she was 3 years old.
My first memory I have was him taking me into the guest bedroom and trying to assault me. And I remember my two brothers were standing at the door. They thought I was being punished, so they were giggling. And then all I remember is the phone ringing and telling him the phone was ringing and trying to distract him. And he said, don't worry about it, and that's when I started to cry.
Brigitte said she had been scared, but she hadn't fully understood.
He said that fathers do that to show their love. And in some cultures in Africa, before the daughter gets married, the father has to break her virginity or whatever.
According to Brigitte, the abuse continued while she lived with her father in Liberia.
Brigitte tried to speak to her mother, her birth mother, and a pastor.
I had told her, like the first night I got there, what he did to me.
She told them both about her father's abuse, but it was no use.
Both of them confronted Mr. Goodridge, and he lied and said that she's crazy and that it's not true.
In both instances, Eric's answer was enough to settle the matter.
Denial is a very strong emotion. People don't want to know that stuff. Even parents, a mother doesn't want to believe that her husband would do something to a child.
Every time she asked for help, I can't do anything to help you. I can't do anything to help you. Go back home with your father.
Brigitte felt like she had no one to turn to for help. But by age 17, she was able to help herself.
The last time her dad assaulted her, she physically fought him off.
Within weeks, Brigitte had left her father's house for good. Then she had struggled to start a new life, but the damage had already been done.
I had begun drinking. No matter where I went, whether it was concerts or the movies or anywhere, I would always take a flask with me, because I just couldn't take being around people at all, even my friends.
The doctors at the psych ward determined that Brigitte was clearly suffering from a post-traumatic stress disorder.
What PTSD is that you're always bombarded with the horrors of the past in your present life. So even though it happened many years ago, she was living every day.
The amount of trauma that she experienced, it was very important for her to really get a lot of counseling, a lot of support.
Brigitte had never sought counseling, however.
I started researching on my own on the internet, and I didn't get any psychological help because what I researched, everyone just kept saying the same thing. It's not your fault, and you couldn't do anything, but I already knew that.
She also knew whose fault it was. And in June of 2007, he had suddenly reappeared in her life.
Nobody knew he was coming. Even her sister Carlene just received the phone call that her cousin was bringing him from the airport.
A few days later, Brigitte had made the trip out to Carlene's Staten Island home to see her father for the first time in more than 8 years.
When I got there, I saw my niece sitting on his lap, and I was shocked. Why would Carlene let him around her daughter? My brother already knew that was a given, not to have him around my niece.
She walks in, sees the man who'd abused her and her sister their whole life in her sister's house with her 5-year-old niece bouncing on her dad's knee the same way he used to bounce Brigitte on her knee before horrible things would happen.
and when she had heard her father's plan to take the little girls back to Liberia, Brigitte told her attorney she tried to talk to Carlene.
Brigitte and her sister Carlene had that talk, that heart-to-heart that Brigitte had been trying to have for years, and really confirming for her how pervasive this abuse was. And still, Carlene allowed her father to stay with her.
Brigitte said she had realized that the cycle of abuse would only end if she took action.
She just said, not again. I'm not letting another life be destroyed.
Although according to Brigitte, she hadn't intended to harm her father when she agreed to meet with him on July 28th.
The first thing I wanted to do was try to get him to confess and admit what he did, as well as try to get help. I had printed out the psychological damages, the rape effects that it has on children, and said if you continue to do this, this is how they're going to end up. They're going to end up like me.
She initially tried to confront him with documentation that's in evidence about incest and the effect on children and rape and how you mess people up for life, and he didn't want to hear any of that.
Then, according to Brigitte, he started to deny everything.
He said, how do you even remember? Weren't you 3 years old? His big apology was, I'm sorry if you think I hurt you.
She started to get angry. She started, things started to get physical. And then there was a confrontation.
Brigitte said the scuffle had ended with her father bound and gagged.
Not surprising. He starts screaming. She grabs a towel, a large bath towel from a dryer, and sticks that in his mouth to keep him from screaming. She then runs to another room and gets the scalpel.
His screams muffled. She had finished the job. Then Brigitte said she had walked out the door, dialing 911 as she left.
She called for help right away.
I just didn't want him to die.
But her phone wasn't all she had with her.
She decided to take the penis with her, and she ran out of the apartment.
According to Brigitte, she still had it moments later when she spoke to her sister on the phone.
In front of the precinct, she calls Carlene and says, oh my gosh, but I cut it off, I did it. And her sister, of course, is confused and outraged and says, don't do anything, I'll never see you again, let me help you.
Brigitte had agreed to let Carlene help her, but there was something else she had to do first. While her sister was en route from Staten Island, Brigitte had walked up onto the boardwalk.
She disposes of the penis under the boardwalk.
She didn't want them to ever find that penis again, because to her it was the object of torture for her for so many years.
Brigitte got her wish. It was never found. But her father was also dead, and the DA's office was contemplating murder charges. Was her shocking tale of incest and torture enough for a defense?
It was so directly tied to the abuse that it seemed like a case that would really play on people's heartstrings.
But was it true?
When you first hear a story, the first reaction is to think this possibly all can't happen to just one person.
In Brigitte's case, it hadn't happened to just one person. Her sister Carlene confirmed the story, telling the attorney that she knew all about their father's abuse.
Carlene knew about this because it happened to her. And Carlene figured out how to get through life by putting this in a box somewhere in her world and ignoring it. But she knew Brigitte didn't do that and couldn't do that.
She told the truth. She told what happened to her from when she was 4 to 12. And I was surprised and very grateful.
Carlene didn't just open up to her sister's attorney either. After years of suffering in silence, Carlene went straight to the media and told the world how she had been abused by her father ever since he took custody of her at age 4.
She came out and said, this happened to me, this happened to my sister, this happened from the time we were both about 3 or 4 years old. And she told me, other reporters, the Montel Williams show, she told a lot of people things that it sounded like she had never told anyone before.
The reaction to Carlene's stunning revelation was overwhelmingly in Brigitte's support.
There was immediately a sort of outpouring of sympathy for her from sexual abuse survivors, from groups that dealt with battered women and women who had been through sexual abuse.
Brigitte's story resonated far beyond abuse survivors, however.
A lot of people's hearts went out to her because it's such a tragic situation. I mean, growing up like that.
We had a prayer vigil for her, and there was a fundraiser at the church in Staten Island. And again, we were there, and we helped out any way we could.
Soon, the swelling ranks of Brigitte's supporters ranged from everyday New Yorkers to some of the city's most powerful politicians.
A lot of public figures came to her defense, most notably New York Senator Chuck Schumer, who in public said that he supported Brigitte, and no one should go through that kind of abuse.
We have a human element to the system of justice, that we take a totality of the crime and the mindset of the person who committed the crime, then make a determining factor of how do we seek justice.
People believed me, which was the best part about it. The politicians, the senators, it was surprising, and I was grateful. I was happy for it.
Brigitte's story had moved public opinion. But what about the DA's office?
Obviously, they couldn't let it go. She had killed him.
On the evening of August 16th, New York police arrested Brigitte at the psychiatric ward where she had spent the last 3 weeks.
They took me to the main precinct in Queens, and I was arraigned that night.
She was charged with intentional murder, which could carry as much as 25 years to life in prison.
Coming up, Brigitte makes her case to the jury.
It wasn't just something about revenge.
And her defense depends upon an unlikely ally.
She'd done research about the Lorena Bobbitt case.
On September 14, 2009, 28-year-old Brigitte Harris stood trial in a New York City courtroom for the murder of her father, Eric Goodridge. It was the culmination of a case that had begun 2 years earlier when Brigitte dialed 911 and summoned paramedics to her Queens apartment.
The EMTs arrived to find Eric Goodridge with a towel wrapped around his neck and stuffed into his mouth, and his penis cut off.
That gruesome act wasn't the whole story, however. Both Brigitte and her sister Carlene claimed their father had sexually abused them.
A lot of public opinion was in Brigitte's favor. People saw what was going on in this situation and said, she needs help. She doesn't need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
The abuse almost eclipsed the murder. When people commented on news stories about it, they were commenting on the abuse, not the murder.
Brigitte also had the support of her siblings and her mother's side of the family. Her father's family defended Eric Goodridge against the abuse allegations. But as the prosecutor pointed out in her opening statement, Brigitte had made sure that Eric would never get the chance to defend himself. She told the jury that Brigitte had taken the law into her own hands, and no amount of abuse could absolve her of that crime.
Miss Harris had her day in court. Unfortunately, her dad did not. He did not have a defense. He did not have anyone speak up for him. She was the judge, the jury, and the executioner in this case.
Essentially, the state argument was, Brigitte was a vigilante.
In its open, the defense didn't deny that Brigitte had killed her father.
We came right out at the beginning and told the jury that she did what the prosecution is alleging she did.
But they also asked the jury to put Brigitte's actions in the proper context.
There was a great deal of life events that happened to her that brought her to that point.
And according to the defense, those events would lead jurors to one conclusion.
Our position was, justice says, let her go home.
They were looking for jury nullification. They were looking for the jury to sympathize emotionally with her abuse and why she would take that out on her father.
When they started presenting their case that afternoon, prosecutors acknowledged the emotional aspect of the case, but they also asked jurors to focus on the facts.
They were showing to us that she ordered all of this and she did all this research online. She had thought this out and she had a plan. So it wasn't just spur of the moment. She knew exactly what she wanted to do.
The prosecutor had an expert on the stand for a whole day about when the scalpel was ordered and how it was ordered and whom ordered it and which computer.
She made a big deal about the scalpels being bought.
It appeared that Brigitte had put a considerable amount of forethought into her father's mutilation. But did that necessarily mean she was planning a murder? Cross-examining the computer expert, Brigitte's attorney pointed out two significant words in her internet search history: Lorena Bobbitt.
She'd done research about the Lorena Bobbitt case and some other cases. And what she found was that in every one of those cases, the person whose penis was severed did not die.
Maybe that had led her to believe that if she did this to her father, he'd be okay.
Brigitte's father hadn't been okay, however. He had died due to his daughter's actions. To explain how, prosecutors called a representative from the medical examiner's office to the stand. Walking jurors through the autopsy report, she revealed one of the central ironies in the case. Brigitte hadn't killed her father by severing his penis.
According to all the medical reports, he was dead already by the time she got his pants down.
According to the autopsy, it wasn't the scalpel that killed Eric Goodridge. It was the towel Brigitte had stuffed in his mouth to muffle his screams.
As he were gagging, the towel worked its way, actually from just covering his mouth to down into the back of his throat.
He ends up asphyxiating and he dies. I don't know that she's fully aware of this situation based on her call to the paramedics.
The defense was certainly quick to point out that Brigitte clearly thought her father was alive when she walked out of her apartment that afternoon. In fact, she had even called 911 and summoned medical help for her father.
Brigitte did not want her father to die. She didn't want to kill her father. So the fact that she made that phone call made sense. It supported what we were saying all along.
But when it came time for the defense to present its case, one important question remained. If she didn't intend to kill him, why had she done it? On September 21st, Brigitte took the stand in her own defense.
I knew in my heart that I wasn't trying to kill him. I was just trying to stop him. I wanted to tell the jury exactly what happened as far as the past, why I chose to do what I did.
The courtroom was packed, it was silent, and the jurors were literally on the edge of their seats, listening to every word that came out of her mouth.
They were hard words to hear.
Her testimony was difficult to listen to. I mean, she was going into details that no one really wants to hear.
It's a bad story, and I mean, the words that need to be used are ones that make people feel very, very uncomfortable.
As bad as the abuse had been, Brigitte said payback wasn't her motive.
There was a reason for me doing this. It wasn't just something about revenge. When he told me that he was going to take my nieces back to Africa with him, I knew I couldn't let that happen. I knew I had to break the cycle somehow.
What could she do? She had already tried telling others about her father's abuse.
From when she was born to the age of 26, everybody failed her. Everyone turned their back on her.
I had researched, actually, the laws. And because the statute of limitations was up, I didn't think the police could help me.
So Brigitte did exactly what the prosecution claimed. She took the law into her own hands. Although contrary to the prosecution, she said she never intended to kill her father.
She wanted to make sure that the weapon that he had used to cause so much suffering in her life was taken away.
I was hoping to stop him. I didn't think it was going to go as far as it did. I was hoping it didn't go as far as it did. But unfortunately, it did. And I wish I could take it back, but...
September 30th, 2009. Brigitte Harris waited at the defense table of a New York City courtroom. Accused of the murder and mutilation of her father, Eric Goodridge, she faced a possible life sentence if convicted. And the jury had just reached a verdict.
The whole time during trial, they had poker faces, so I could never tell what was going on in their minds.
Days earlier, in emotional testimony, Brigitte had detailed years of sexual abuse inflicted by her father.
I was terrified to testify because Arthur told me that I should put a little bit more emotion in when I'm speaking, but I didn't want to seem fake, and I didn't want to cry on cue just because I wanted to express remorse, but I just wanted to tell the story, and hopefully they believe me.
But would her taboo-ridden tale have its intended effect?
We actually reached a decision pretty quickly.
On the charge of second-degree murder, the jury found Brigitte not guilty.
The fact that she called 911, to me personally, it showed that she didn't want him to die.
Instead, jurors convicted Brigitte on the lesser charge of second-degree manslaughter.
What she did was completely wrong. There's no denying that. And we charged her with, what was appropriate.
When the jury had to deliberate, they went with the least amount of charges possible.
For Brigitte, the verdict was a vindication.
I was satisfied because I knew, just from the verdict alone, that the jury had believed me.
The jury's support even extended beyond the verdict.
Some of the 12 jurors wrote letters to the judge asking that Brigitte be sentenced with time served and, trying to compel the judge to be as lenient as possible.
But at Brigitte's sentencing on November 6th, the judge ignored the jurors' pleas on Brigitte's behalf.
He sentenced her to 5 to 15 years, which was pretty steep for a second-degree manslaughter charge.
20% of cases that are verdicts of manslaughter in the second degree in New York State receive sentences of straight probation.
Brigitte's attorneys filed an immediate appeal. But whatever the outcome, Brigitte has already begun planning for her future.
She wants to be somebody who helps others and tells other, girls and women that they don't have to live in silence.
What I did is not the answer. The answer is to tell someone and tell anyone and keep on telling them.